Hey, what's up, turtle? It's Krik here with Black Outdoors. Today I want to do a video showing how to do sort of the basics of reversed wrap cordage. And how it's going to be used today is how I store the tulip poplar bark, the inner bark, in my fire kit, because it's convenient to store, basically just to store it in my little tin in a reverse wrap cordage. Here's just a little bit I did earlier today, and this is probably all I'd put in my kit, because you can imagine it being sort of, some elasticity in there. It being sort of, you know, bent, storing in an Altoids container. And this is really thick, but this is what we're going to end with. So let's get started and get some raw material, and I'll show you how to, from the beginning to the end. Here's about 12, 13 inches of a piece of tulip poplar bark, Liriodendron tulipifera. I prefer genus and species over common names. That way resources don't get confused, because there's so many common names for areas and that, you know, regionally specific. But anyways, this is the tulip poplar tree, inner bark. So what we're going to do is some reverse wrap cordage. And the first step is to get a hunk of bark in general. So I'm going to probably try to at least get an inch, maybe a little more than an inch to start with of width. I'm going to start that here. I want all of this to come. It's alright if it's not coming off in one piece, or one big piece. Sorry if there's little striations in it. I'm going to just gently take this off. I want all these fibers to stay intact, and just work my way down. I can tell this is a little damp. It's coming off pretty nice. See what it looks like underneath it. See how it's just coming. There's still a little bit of fibers in here, but coming off pretty well. Kind of just keep working this down slowly. And when you're making cordage in general, it really is a touch and patience. You don't just want to bear through it. If you hit sort of a spot where it's offering you some resistance, you don't just want to rip through it. You want to kind of slowly work around it. And this isn't as sort of delicate or as fine of processing as I would do if I wanted some actual cord, because I'm just storing it for fire tinder. And here's the raw piece. Fibers in here, the fibers we're going after, and the outer bark here. So actually what we can do now, I'm going to get my stool out, I'm going to sit down and get comfortable and start processing this down a little bit more. Here's our piece. Now I'm going to start breaking off this outer bark. And this sort of method of processing sort of rough or what's the word I'm looking for? Thick bark off of a plant that may be very fibrous, and elongated fibers in here is a characteristic I'm looking for in any sort of natural plant that's going to be either work well or work really well for cord. Is you want to break out, sort of break this up in sections. I'm just doing it down right now, breaking down pieces. In this method, you know, you sort of do it the same if you were, dogbane, cannabinum. Sort of you break the stems and get the outer bark off in the same manner. It's a pretty common way to get inner fibers off specific types of plant. And then once I start doing that, breaking this off in sections, I'm going to start just peeling off the bark, the outer bark, and leaving the light colored brown or tan inner bark. And like I said, if I was really trying to make this really finely processed for cordage, I'd probably be taking my time a little bit more and be really more diligent with the amount of bark I was taking off, and or the really hard or rough spots. You see how this is really holding together still. But for today's purposes and for how I'm storing it for fire tinder, it's really not necessary, so I'm not going to do it. So it just pops up once I sort of break them into sections. Just continue doing this, and I'm going to work my whole way down. All this brown bark, I don't want any of that in there. Or not the brown, that sort of grayish color bark. I don't want any of that in there as best as I can, because it's really not going to allow for a tight wrap when I'm making storing cordage. You can work both ways too. If it starts to pull up too much of the inner fibers that you don't want to keep continuing this, sort of like you would if you hit a knot or a grain change in a wood, just come from the other direction and peel it off. So I'm coming this way. I don't like how it's pulling up. Just reverse direction, take it off from the other way. No problem with that. No problem, Bob. No problem, Bob. Bob's Burgers, no problem. And this can be very time intensive, depending if you want to make, a couple meters, worth of rope or cord. It's going to be very time intensive with this resource, with Liriodendron species. Yucca works really well for this, really well, really strong, so much stronger tensile strength in this bark, but this is what we have in the eastern woodlands. So this is what I'm going to be using for obviously fire tinder. Yucca not for fire tinder, but for cordage. Using this for cordage in the eastern woodlands. Coming off of a live tree, this would be much stronger, the inner fibers, but I don't want anything alive for this because I want it to be dry and dead for a spark. Getting down to the very last bit now of processing this outer bark off, and that probably took me right around 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less. And this is what we have now, final product, to a degree. This is what I'm looking for. None of that gray bark on there, just all this long fibrous bark. If I wanted to make actual cordage out of this, I'd be pulling pieces off even this wide right here under my finger, or over my finger, and even thinner if I wanted to, depending what I wanted it for. If I wanted really, really thin stuff for potentially, I don't know, fletching, putting fletching on an arrow or something like that, I'd process this down. But I'm going to keep it this because, like I said before, with this piece I showed you, I want it thick. I'm storing this for fire tinder. I want a big, almost rope-like thickness next to my pinky, a little bit smaller. So I'm going to keep all of this at this, mass, if you will. And I'm going to put a little bit of water on this, maybe. Before I do that, I'm going to start just break these fibers up a little bit, pull them apart, and that will help me get a tighter wrap, and it'll just help it sort of twist on itself more because I'm keeping it very thick. And the thicker sort of you keep your starting points of your fibers, the more difficult it can be for it to bind on itself and to get a nice tight wrap. But I'm just going to break this up a little bit. Just keeping on. Just pulling this apart a little bit more, and the more I do now, the less I'll have to do once I, cut a section off that I want to use for a fire. I'm going to actually probably put a little bit of water on this because it's dead bark, and it might be a little brittle and partly rotten or starting to degrade. Put a little bit of water on it. Let's pour some in my hand. Yep, losing it all. What I'm going to do is just put this in my hand. Okay, cool. So, if I was actually making cordage from this, I would not want these to be meeting at the end here. I want them to be staggered because I'm going to have to splice in, obviously, length if I'm trying to make, you know, 4, 5, 6 feet, couple meters. I'd want these to be staggered so my splices don't meet up evenly. But I want these to meet because I'm just putting the length this is. I'm not going to be splicing it. That's just how it's going to be. So once I find the middle point, it's right here, I'm going to go on both sides of that and start twisting my left hand towards me, my right hand away from me. See what's happening here. So I start twisting that. It's getting tight now. Work towards the center a little bit. It's getting tight. And once I get to where I feel like it's not going anymore, I want to go a little bit farther than that. So it'll actually, I'm keeping this in frame for y'all, full yins. I go tight and go a little bit farther and past that, and then it sort of kinks and binds on itself right at the beginning. And that's how I'm going to start it. Now at this point, this is see how this is twisted over top right here? I want to keep that twisted, holding with my left hand. And this side that's underneath, I'm going to twist that away from me, grab the piece that's under, pull it over, and then move my hand up. Just keep repeating this process. This is the part that's underneath right now. I'm going to twist this to get it tight. Make sure this piece is staying tight too. Grab this tight, pull, bring it under, move, shift my hand up to grab what I just twisted, and keep doing this process. And this just takes a little bit of practice, but once you do it, you can get really good. Do this really fast. This is sort of marginal material. Like I said, this really isn't as clean or as processed finely as I would want to if I was actually trying to make some fine cordage out of it, but for our purposes, this is all we need it for. Probably could have put a little bit more water on this, but that's all right. Just going to continue to finish this off, these last few wraps. And there we go. I'll hold the end. This is the end we started with, that we had kink on itself, that we had bind. And this is down here is the working end that mushed on itself. You see the two pieces. If you do it right, it should stay together, should be nice and tight. This is wet because I put water in it to help it bind together, but obviously I'm doing this for just, you know, putting it in my kit for later use, nothing I'm trying to use right now, obviously. That's why I got it wet, or why you wouldn't want to get it wet. But at this point, let's take the piece I had already in my pocket drying and show how it works. This is the piece I made earlier before the video, and it was probably damp on the ground. We're gonna see if it dried out enough. It's been on my breast pocket since we've been filming, maybe about an hour. I'm just gonna cut a little piece off. Just unwrap. I can still feel it's damp, but this will be a good test to see how this reacts, even if it's a little damp, if I can process it down. Trying to warm it up just a tad bit in my hand, create some friction, create heat, dry out that little bit. Yeah, oh yeah, I can feel this is just so much warmer just by doing that, creating that friction in my hand. So actually I can feel the heat from that process of doing that. might be marginal, but... And this is just a very, very, very small amount. I'm doing it for demonstrative purposes, just to show you. But if I was obviously trying to get a fire going for real, I could still use this amount, no problem. Or if I really need to fire and I wasn't really want to take any chances, I would just get a whole bunch of this. See how she fares. Fair maiden. See if that'll take a spark. Prep the area. Damn ground. Ooh. There you go. Could process a little bit more, but you see, that's all there is to it. If you have any questions about anything I did in the video, leave a comment, don't hesitate. Anything you liked I did, leave a comment, don't hesitate. Anything you can add, don't hesitate, leave a comment. It's Krik signing out, Black Outdoors. Later, turtles.